Welcome to the Symbolic Lodge of Conversation, where consciousness and curiosity interweave into discussion. This is All Square Podcast. I'm your host, R.L. Franks, and today's guest has been on a spiritual journey into the mystical world of Freemasonry. This is the story of worshipful brother Kevin Fuller. Kevin, thank you for being a part of our show today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
I can't
see where this conversation is going to go.
I can't wait to dive into this.
Yeah.
Kevin, how did you find Masonry?
Actually, for years, I drove by Masonic temples, and my son, who's 21 now, he and I would joke before I was a member. I said, "Wonder what they're doing in there, right? Or like, what's going on in there?" We kind of joke as we go by, but many of the temples I drove by, or the Masonic buildings, I should say, I didn't even know that they were, held lodges within them. So I really was at kind of like a point in my life where I was kind of looking for something more, and just kind of wanted to be a part of something different. And quite honestly, I was intrigued by the mystery, right? Like, I wanted to find out what's going on inside those doors, right? So that's kind of really what sparked my interest in Masonry. It was a change of time in my life, and then just kind of everything lined up, and so I reached out to the lodge there near my house, and I want to say, it was probably, it was a good month of just getting to visit with the guys ahead of time, before I even was brought in, right? Even brought into the lodge. So getting to know some of the guys. I think some of the questions that were asked, what was I looking for in Masonry, right? And those were things that I had to look within myself, right? And then not for probably necessarily an external proof, but I think even in Masonry we have that, right? Like, we get a new candidate, they have something that they're looking for in Masonry, and we, as I want to say, maybe more experienced Masons, if they're voted in, we have an obligation to help provide them that experience, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is spirituality and, the mystery of the fraternity, have you always been intrigued into this since you were little, or just because you were driving around buildings?
Really Masonry, again, when I approached Masonry, I didn't know what I was looking for. So my history, I grew up Roman Catholic. I kind of would say, in my teen years, I began through theological studies, kind of got into more of the Eastern traditions, or Hindu and Buddhism and things like that, and Islam as well. And just from observing, because I was never necessarily exposed to that, right? It wasn't my annual practice of going to church every week and my religious studies in school, although I want to say in high school, introduced a little bit to that. So when I approached Masonry, it wasn't, I didn't even have the spiritual kind of connotation when I approached Masonry. In fact, I remember saying it when I was asked at the end of the first time I was brought into lodge, I could say a few words, and I was like, I can't believe you guys mentioned God. That's so cool. I felt that was fantastic, and just the acknowledgement of that, right? The right, for those non-Masons, right? That part of becoming a Mason, one of the requirements, you believe in a supreme deity or supreme being, deity, whatever it is that you call a supreme being, right? And then when I found out that that was referenced, that was new to me in the Masonic journey, because I didn't know that, But I want to say everything from I want to say spiritual alchemy, probably some more mystical practices and things like that, where I was just from a philosophical and just my curious nature to approach those things, and then to see some things just accented in Freemasonry was cool. It was great.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I've had the good fortune to actually watch your journey unfold from when you started. I'm very close with your lodge, Phoenix Lodge in Perrysburg, Ohio. Yeah. Why do you think Masonry is important in today's society?
I felt that there were certain things that I wanted to put down, right? I wanted to put my phone down, right? I wanted to be in a group where I wasn't glued to my phone, or I wasn't looking up answers, right? Or I wasn't trying to tap into something that was, I want to say, more external. And for me, that was, I found that in Masonry, right? There were different experiences. While it is just, it's a fraternity, right? It's all guys. And then to have that unique experience with those men in that setting, right? Because a lot of the guys are guys like, I don't know if we ever would have met, and been able to spend time together outside of the fraternity, just given our different paths and our vocations, maybe our interests. But I mean, there's nothing like going across, like being in an airport and, Las Vegas, Nevada, and running into a Mason, and then you're talking, right? Like you're talking like your long lost friends, right? Because we kind of have that central focal point of Freemasonry.
Has that happened to you?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So I mean, for me, if I see some of the Masonic, I wear a Masonic ring, I'll walk up and be like, "Are you a Mason?" And sometimes people are a little standoffish. Me, I'm very open. I'm like, "Hey, I'm a Mason. I'm, a member of Phoenix Lodge 123 in Ohio." And then we just kind of see where the conversation goes, and kind of take their temperature, when you tell them that you served as an officer, and, then people start to open up. Okay, this isn't a guy that just, read some internet Freemasonry. He's like lived it, right? This is part of him. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
What separates this fraternity from like some of the other great social organizations like Knights of Columbus, Elks, Moose, Lions Club, Kiwanis, even some of the networking groups like BNI. What do you think draws us together to this well of knowledge and understanding in Freemasonry?
I don't know if I can speak to any of the other groups because other than just being familiarized with them or maybe going to a chicken dinner or something like that, I don't really know how they work internally. So I couldn't really compare that to Freemasonry. But I mean, for me, it's that bond, right? It's the bond that I think we have, and not contrasting, to any of those organizations. But Freemasonry in itself I know some people don't like to call it a fraternity, right? Or you might hear them call the craft or something like that, right? Where, because I think some of those people, when you talk about spirituality and Masonry, it's become so much more, right? It's not just a club, right? It's become a part of their life. And I think some of the moral teachings that are accented in Freemasonry that we're encouraged to study is almost a charge to carry that out into the world, right? So we don't just leave it there, right? We have a little bit that we bring with us when we leave that space. So,
yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. We talk about a lot of these principles and teachings, and there's a lot of paper writing in here. Has there been any authors or writers who's really influenced you on this journey or enhanced your journey by reading more? You're a very scholarly guy in the fraternity. So, yeah, can you talk about that a little?
yeah, I will. And I'm going to kind of preface it by going back to like how I began my journey in Freemasonry,
Okay.
and again, going back to, I didn't know what I expected when I went into the lodge. And when I went through the process, and it's an initiatory process, right? Like there's things that you go through, right? And when I was able to give those few words of like, how did you feel when you went through this, right? And in our meeting, and one of the things I said was like I really felt like it was happening through me, right? Like it was like this change was happening through me. And the more I kind of talked about it with some of the other Masons, there was somebody who told me, it was like, yeah, like 3% of like Masons, I don't know where they get this stats from, but they said, get what you got, like, and it was a fantastic experience for me. Post that, somebody advised me to read Wilmshurst, right? So that was probably one of my first like Masonic like author books, on Freemasonry.
For the people, maybe non-Masons, who is Wilmshurst? Just to preface that.
I wish I could say a little bit more maybe about his personal life. He's a Masonic author,
Okay.
right? So The Meaning of Masonry was actually the book that I read. So, and it can be the way that, depending on the version that you get of it, they're all, I'm going to say, relatively similar, but it can be very wordy, right? And
Sure.
very intellectual heavy, right? And it was written at a different time in the, I would say, early 1900s or something like that, if I recall. I could be wrong.
Sure.
But so that was the first book I got, and there's a lot of, I'm going to say, spiritual connotations in there that he draws and parallels, right, through the Masonic craft. and then also through his reference. He's Christian based like myself, right? So a lot of this stuff is referenced from that like perspective or that vantage point. And so that was like, it was probably a good book for whoever put that in my hand for me to read, because they saw what I got out of my initiatory process, right?
So it's a good starter book for any young Masons into the fraternity to read.
I would say if you are looking for like something, it's something to be revisited. It's going to be very tough for somebody to digest, but again, you have to kind of put yourself in my place. I was reading as an entered apprentice, you know, and there's stuff in there that's way over the entered apprentice head. But I would look at like Carl Claudy or something like that. For those are good. I want to say like the Entered Apprentice or something like that. Those are probably good beginner books if you're looking for something light. But if you found a spiritual connection in Freemasonry, I would say Wilmshurst is good. That's a really good starting point, especially if you later on or have any, even coming into the fraternity, have an exposure to like esoteric sciences, if you will, right? Or philosophy. Yeah.
Which is something that you're very much into. I mean, you touched upon it in the beginning. You were talking a little bit about, spiritual alchemy.
Yeah.
What's that all entail when you say that word, spiritual alchemy? Because we all hear alchemy and some medieval people trying to turn lead into gold. But what do you think spiritual alchemy is about?
I want to say, so just like Freemasonry uses, I want to say the allegory of the builder, right? Or the stonemason, right? So too, the spiritual alchemist would use the allegory of the alchemist of whether that be working with metals, right? And the idea of, if you know anything about alchemy, I think most people think the first thing comes to mind is like turning lead into gold, right? While there probably never really happened, you can apply that process like spiritually, right? So in alchemy, there are certain processes, right? Various phases of alchemy where things transition and happen. And then doing the work and as a practical, like metallurgist, probably mess that up, but if you're practicing with metals, right, you're going to see a certain result, and you'll see these things in the work that you're doing. And they believed in many cases that as these processes were happening without, they were also happening within, right? So there was a spiritual connotation to alchemy in it of itself. Today, if you're not a practicing alchemist and you're maybe looking more along the lines of spiritual alchemy, let's say you're using that as your allegory for a process that would be a change from within. So
that self-contemplation, meditating over how to be a better man out of these teachings and papers and writers that have been contributing to Freemasonry, and because it's like a repository of all these collections, right? It's been around for hundreds of years, and I noticed that there's a gap in the Masonic writings from Claudy, from you said, was it Willermo's? No, Wilmshurst. And it feels like from back when they were writing till which was about what time zone back then, when Claudia was writing,
early 1900s,
yeah, to today, where you guys got Jamie Paul Lamb, Pierce Vaughn, P.D. Newman, Sean Iyer, Roberto Sanchez, all these guys. Why do you think there's a revival now into writing? Because I don't ever hear anybody from the 90s or 70s or 60s really writing on masonry. I mean, I bet you it was happening.
Yeah.
But why do you think there has been kind of like a revival into writing?
I don't know if it necessarily ever really went away, in my opinion. I think we're seeing a lot more because we're exposed. Our communication has gotten better, right, from a distance, right, and our ability to be able to publish, to send things out, to receive manuscripts, and be able to either translate them, right, or then to come up with our new ideas. I mean, if you go back and you read a lot of, I would say, some of the Masonic some of the Masonic texts that we have, I mean, how many times can you write about the entered apprentice degree, right?
True.
Under a certain given frame of mind, right? So I think you've seen some of these people that the people you've mentioned have really found a good parallel with whatever it is that they may be exposed to in their, outside the Masonic lodge, and things that parallels, if you will, that they would bring into their Masonic life, or a new way of looking at their Masonic journey.
You think Freemasonry has helped you with, what they write about, just expounding upon, reflecting on some of the teachings? Do you think that's helped you become a better man? Because that's what you were kind of looking for, to build within yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Freemasonry, without a doubt, and everyone, I feel, receives different things from the fraternity, right? Or finds things that are unique to them, that bring out probably the best characteristics, or have the ability to bring out their best characteristics. I mentioned my path and like probably more spiritual nature, but I enjoy the ritual and some of the degree works that have taken me into studying that as well. It's helped me probably be a better public speaker, right? In our meetings, we have parliamentary rules, or Robert's Rules of Order, right? And we have a chair, or the master, right? Who sits in a chair's position and runs a meeting, right? So I've seen Masons that love to just get together and do the green bean, and chicken dinner kind of thing, and just get together and maybe have a piece of cake or pie afterwards. I've seen guys that love the business, right? Or doing the finances for the lodge, right? Because all those things are important. But I think it's a good opportunity for every man to be able to experience that, right? And be able to accent that, because there's room for error there. Nobody's going to be like, "Hey, Robbie, listen, man, like, you totally suck at this." The guys are going to encourage you to do better, right?
Absolutely.
And it's also a good support group too, right? In that regard.
It's a welcoming presence in the fraternity. We've read articles on people who talk about the egregore, that thought form that brings everybody together, that energy in the room, that you feel that welcomingness. And, that only comes from hundreds of years of people dwelling together for the greater good.
Yeah.
And one thing I heard, I wasn't able to attend your lodge that day, but even after lodge, the fellowship you guys were having in the lodge, you want to talk about, you kind of did like a tasting of mead in the lodge, and you kind of correlated that into a great lesson for your lodge over at Perrysburg.
Yeah. So just want to clarify. So everybody, in the state of Ohio, we don't drink in the lodge room. So
Correct.
We consider that consecrated space. We don't drink in the lodge rooms, but we do have deconsecrated space in the Masonic building itself, which is not part of the lodge. It's in the hall. And so we tried to incorporate, so anyone that doesn't know what mead is, it's a honey wine. So similar in the winemaking process, except you use honey for the sugars. And then I kind of paralleled like the working tools of, a winemaker, if you will, or a mead maker, and then some of the things that you put into it, right? And try to really just kind of show how that was unique, like our Masonic journey and the symbol set that we use in Masonry with the square and the compasses, and the things that we think of, for someone that was working with stone. Right. If you were building a cathedral, right, and you were building a temple for God, essentially, everything you did, right, your tools were an extension of not just your physical ability, but when we talk about, I'm a carpenter, I'm a union carpenter by trade, right? So when we talk about pride in our work, those tools are an extension of that, like the pride that you take in your work, right? So in the mead making process, I try to point to certain things that were like the tool of the mead maker, right? Where we're not just, you sanitize things. You try to keep things very clean, right? You don't want your wine or mead to come out like vinegar at the end, right? Because you have a bad or a yeast that's not welcome, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And just some of the things I put into it. Yeah. So I try to really, and then encourage the other brothers to, like, one of our brothers is a DJ, I want to hear your Masonic, journey, but put in like the DJ terms, like
Yeah, I could
some
only imagine.
turntables or something, those are
As
your working tools, right?
of course, no,
Yeah.
I love it. I like, how is the modern Mason using the tools that he deals with on a day-to-day basis to better his work, better himself, provide that income for himself in life. Um, what do you get the most out of this fraternity? Is it the brotherhood? Is it the discussions? Is it just the traveling? Is it the fellowship? Like, what do you get excited to come to a lodge? Because there are lodges that all they do is business meetings,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yeah, and for I'm not so much into the business side, although I feel like I mean, that's necessary, right?
Mhm.
At least given the day in today's world and the way that Freemasonry fits into today's world and how it's been shaped, that's necessary. But I mean, for me, I always feel like I'm always discovering something new, and I really enjoy that. So when I go into a lodge room, a lot of times, like I'm gonna say at Phoenix, we do a lot of education, right? So we will do a piece of Masonic education, and it varies. It could be a brother presenting. Sometimes we'll read an article. It could be something, but the idea is to just spark, a thought and then have conversation about it. And I feel like every time I'm in there, I not only learn something more about myself, but I learn something about the brothers in that room, that I again can take back out into the world, right? And really kind of view it through a different lens. So for me, it's really being able to uncover something new. We think about in masonry, and even when we think about the symbols, even for someone that's not a mason, right? It's like, if you ever thought about, okay, what are the masons doing? Are they hiding something? Are they keeping things secret? Well, I want to say that it's not so much that, but the idea of being able to uncover, right? Or to uncover these things and within ourselves and the brothers in the room. So for me, that's probably the most joyous thing. And it could be anything. It doesn't even have to be about Masonic tools. It could be like, what's important to you? I learned something new about you today, right?
Right.
And your spiritual journey, right? Before this interview. So
Absolutely.
that was new to me, right?
Absolutely. I think it's the discussion,
Yeah.
right? I think I've talked about this on the podcast before that sometimes technology limits that social interaction because we see everybody posting the pictures and the videos and their interests. But when's the last time we did a wellness check on them?
Yeah.
When's the last time I reached out to you? Hey, let's get a cup of coffee. Is everything going well in your life? Because then you see these unfortunate things go on in people's lives and you had no idea because everything looks all great. The grass is green over there and they're having the best time of their life, but they're really having an internal struggle. And that's what I think I really love about this fraternity is how we're all here for each other.
Yeah.
I remember a time when, you really talked about, and it was out of the blue, but I think it was so necessary, suicide awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think that's so important in a fraternal organization of men?
Well, I want to say as men, right, in today's society, we don't always show each other affection, right? Nor do I, like I see you, I give you a hug. We give each other hugs,
We
right?
do.
Like and to me, like I enjoy that. That's how I appreciate, like when we meet, I'll give you a hug, right?
Yep.
But I feel like there's a lot of guys that are a little bit standoffish, but they also don't know each other as well to be able to do that, right? And I kind of had said in the lodge setting that, this is something that we have here in this space. It's extremely special, right? Like I've met you that I wouldn't know anywhere else, right? Like
Yep.
other than maybe, but odds are maybe not, right? So we share something here that we don't share with our families. We don't not maybe some of the guys work together, but not always, right? That we're not sharing at work. This is unique, right? So there's things that we can share while we're here. But nobody ever talks about those things, right? They don't talk about maybe the struggles that they're going through. And it's just another thing that I think it needs to be talked about more. We need to hug each other. Tell your brother you love him, right? And we have a lot of people that were in the military, right? And PTSD, right? The things that most of those guys are pretty good at hiding it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Very stoic.
Yeah.
Stoic
Yeah.
individuals.
And the point is, like, we're here for you in that regard, man. Like, just call me, man, or just come up and give me a hug. You know, like if that's what you need, come give me a hug, right? Like, I feel like that's important in the sense that we do share something special inside the lodge room, and that those guys should feel welcome when they're there for a new Mason, right?
Yeah,
And even
100%.
for the guy that's been around 20, 30 years, right? They should still feel like they should be able to share that experience, right? So I think suicide awareness comes along with that, right? It's like being aware of how we observe others, because like I said, not everybody shows that,
Yep.
right? And that's really part of the obligation. You know, I say a point in history where Freemasonry, you know, today we have health insurance, right? Freemasonry was a form of health insurance, or
Yeah.
who's going to take care of my family if I die, right? I have no. My parents are not my parents, but I'm
Sure.
speaking in context of, you know, say 150 years ago. My parents maybe passed away. Maybe I don't have any family. I moved to a new area. Your lodge brothers were obligated to take care of you, right?
Absolutely.
So we shouldn't lose that in the fraternity. I think it's an important part of Freemasonry too, right?
Absolutely. That fellowship in the fraternity, which really unites us.
Yeah.
And knowing that you're not alone in what you're going through. There's a lot of men who's all have been a part of highs and lows in their life, but yeah, we're charged to be that better man, to be there for our brother. And that's why I love the mentorship. Mike Liu, who's my partner in All Square Podcast,
Yeah.
you know, fellow crafter, right? I'm working with him with his degree, with his little exam book. And I'm not only just telling him how to read a code, I'm working with him through this journey. I'm trying to enlighten why we say this, because I want him to be so prepared. Because you know as well as I do, out in the Masonic world, somebody's going to test you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
there's
of
going to be
course.
somebody who's portraying they're amazing because they read an article or they're wearing a jewel. And
Yeah.
you have to know if this guy's really a brother or not,
Mm-hmm.
and be able to show a veteran of the fraternity. Yeah, I am a Mason. I know what my duties are, and I'm charged to uphold this fraternity. You know, just like I know a lot of men in the military have that brotherhood of what they had to go through. And that's when I think Masonry really exploded into a fraternal aspect, because there was men who were stoic, who, you know, were going through PTSD and didn't have that place where they were able to open up. And I think that's why everybody rushed to Masonry, to be that kind of place
Yeah.
and be a part of that troop, that tribe in the fraternity. You know, we're in an interesting time in the world right now, and a lot of people your age, a lot of people my age, we're not that far apart, is really diving into spirituality. And you're seeing some people go into institutional churches, Roman Catholic, Methodist, Protestant, non-denom. Then you're also seeing people go into other branches of spirituality, Wiccan, Buddhist, um, Hindu, some of these Gnostic churches.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what would, you know, you're a very spiritual guy, and I know that you're very in tuned into what you believe in, and you're always constantly learning. Why do you think right now everybody's flocking to some form of spirituality?
I don't know. And I don't know if it's necessarily, you kind of point to that's happening more now than maybe before. I know I'm coming from a Catholic, like grew up Catholic, right? Like I mentioned.
Yep. I grew up Catholic,
So
went
that was for the
Orthodoxy.
most part until I became, I want to say, like a little more comfortable to do my own studies. I mean, I did. I was kind of all over the place, right? Not in a sense that I ascribed to. I never got away from Christianity. It's always been my core,
Of
right?
course.
But I think even now, I mean, the world that we live in, it's just so through the means of communication, the ads, and you know, just things that you're bombarded by. You know, like it's hard to discern for someone who has never been really like spiritually accustomed to many things, it's very difficult to discern what is probably true and what is made up, right? Because I think there are things out there that will try to maybe lead you down the wrong path,
Sure.
right? That maybe the end result is not necessarily what is going to, maybe not going to be beneficial for you as an individual, right?
Mhm.
So those things are very tough to discern. So I feel like right now, kind of what you're pointing to is people are just maybe experimenting, right? Maybe they're trying to find that home again, where they feel most comfortable, right? Spirituality, right? Because I think everybody knows in some regard. I think even I would like to speak to someone that doesn't maybe believe in a supreme being and see their take on it, but there's always something, I think, inherently, even if you call it instinct, right? Like there is something that you have within you that kind of calls to something ancient, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people, I think, look for it, right? You find different things that you look for it in, right?
Oh, I agree with you 100%. That's another thing, atheism, agnostic, it's really either it's really growing or it's just portrayed like that on, social media that, everybody's espousing to more of those kind of ideologies. And it's always interesting to have a conversation with somebody. I'm like, well, I don't, me personally, this is my belief, I don't think all this just happened, right?
Yeah,
There
right.
has to be some kind
Yeah,
of plan about this. And then he gets into some of the conspiracy things about simulation theory and, we're in a giant computer and we're nothing but Sims,
yeah,
minus a little green crystal over our heads.
right. But
Um,
somebody made that, right? There's somebody probably created that if that was
yeah.
I don't know. I know you can kind of go all over the place with it, but I feel like it's always good to have like a good foundation, right? Like to try to establish your roots in something that, you feel very comfortable in, and then always going back to, right? Being able to go back to that, and just stay rooted in something,
Sure.
because many of these things, I want to say like even like a modern like drug culture, right? And there's see more people. I want to see like getting into like go to a music festival today. They're probably doing different stuff than they were doing before, but some of the things that you're probably exposed to are necessarily is that a pathway that you want to go down, right? For me,
Right.
that's not my thing, right? I know in certain cultures and traditions, people have kind of used that, right, for your shaman or your medicine man for a spiritual awakening and things like that. But I think for most people, if you're trying to maybe experiment, like your body can naturally do these things, whether you realize it or not. You can through whether it's through meditation, I would say even prayer, right?
Well, let's go into that. Not that you have, how do I want to say this? Not that there's one particular way of praying
Yeah.
or meditating, but why is that so important for an individual?
And I want to say for just to superficially approach it, right? And we think of
Sure.
meditation, I think a lot of times in prayer, for some reason, I've been surrounded by a lot of people that have like this angst, who grew up Christian, right? And like just for whatever reason, don't ascribe to it anymore. And you mentioned prayer and they're turned off, but you talk about meditation, they're like, oh yeah, now I know what you're talking about, right? So I think some of the terminology, phraseology you use with it is important, but I think it's important to spend some time communing with yourself for one, right? And then what you would consider God, right? Or whatever that higher being is to you, right? So I think there's some time that pulls you outside of getting in your car and going to work, right? Like, and knowing you got to go through the routine of what's going to happen today at work, right? I know I got to go home. I know I got to plan dinner, right? And all those things seem very noisy in your head, and you can lose touch with yourself, in my opinion. And it can be maybe not so healthy, and it actually can affect your physical nature too, right?
I 100% agree with you. I have ADD. My mind goes a mile a minute. I'm always like, if I hear a noise, I'm like, what's that? What's going on? I trying to get into a meditative state, reflecting on all that I'm grateful for in my life, my God, and connecting with them, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to be able to do that. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would. Think about it. I'm not a weightlifter, right? But for someone who's into bodybuilding to build muscle mass, like you have to stay at it, right? Like you have to continue to lift weights, and then there's certain things you do along the way, like eating right or eating the right foods that are going to get you there to that whatever end result you're looking for, right? So I think, just like meditation and prayer, it's something that you have to make it a part of your life, right? Like just if you're going to change your diet, it's got to be part of my routine from now on, know. And you have to realize too that in many of those practices, I mean, you're going to fall, right? You're going to, you know what, man, I was at a party and there was a cheeseburger there and I ate a cheeseburger, like it wasn't in my diet, but it felt good to eat it, right? And sometimes you'll do that spiritually too, you'll err. And I think what's most important about it is that you're conscious, you're aware of it, and then have the desire probably to reapproach it, That's why at least my weight training in the spiritual world has probably been, that's how I would approach it, right?
Absolutely. I pray constantly, whether it's just driving to work or just talking or asking advice, manifesting that connection with the divine.
Mm-hmm.
Something that's new to me, and I think you know a little bit on because you've looked at it. Can you talk a little bit about Reiki and Reiki therapy and what that's about and maybe the benefits of what Reiki therapy is? I said that correct, right?
Yeah. So I'm a Reiki practitioner. And basically Reiki is like energy. You could consider energy work, right?
Okay.
I would say it's become more popularized, at least as we know it. The modern Reiki setting was probably, I think it came out in the 20s, right? From Japan. And it was basically a guy that was, I'm kind of giving you the drunk history version.
That's
right?
fine.
It was a dude, he was on a retreat, like a Buddhist retreat, and had an experience, right? An enlightening experience of being able to heal and work with this energy, right? So a lot of Reiki through their, I want to say the way it's kind of like carried out in the world today, in the States are like 3 phases, right? There's like Reiki 1, 2, and 3, simple, nothing fancy, but 1 focuses on being able to lay hands on yourself, right? And being able to like work with the energy on your own body. And then 2 is where you're like able to lay hands on other people, right? And then 3 is like that's kind of where you're really pushing to be able to teach others, right? Like you want to be able to hopefully instruct other people if you want, right? I never had a desire to instruct other people. So I never myself and never really moved to Reiki 3, if you will.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say it's like an energy working. And I think if you, think about things in history, if you think about the, even the life of Christ and his, the things that he charged his apostles with, or disciples, right? They had the ability to lay hands and to heal the sick, right? And I'm not saying that Reiki is that, and
Sure.
Master Jesus didn't give me that authority, but I feel like there maybe he did, right? Or maybe that there's something in there that gave me the okay to do it, because I know I've seen just benefits through my own practice, but then also like working with the people that have taught me. And then how it affects other people. I mean, there's a lot of things out there we can't see, right?
Sure.
Actually, they've been able to monitor some of the energies more recently here, whether it's Reiki, like Kundalini, right? You'll talk about that.
Just about to get into that because I've heard of it, but I don't know that much about it. I know it's a type of yoga, correct?
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of get. And what's awesome now is my wife's teaching Kundalini, and really what it has to do is like this energy that is like stored at the base of the spine, if you will, and
chakras.
Yeah, so chakras you could consider, and I'm being very generic when I say this. If somebody watching, we're like, yeah, that's not right. They're energy centers within the body, right? There's 7 of them. There's many really just awesome ways to parallel that. Like if you're more into the Western traditions, there's planetary influences within the body, right?
Okay.
but Kundalini is that energy that like kind of would snake up the spine, if you will, would kind of and stir up and awaken these, spiritual centers or energy centers in your body, So you'll see that in more so in the Eastern world, right? You'll see that. Not that it hasn't come to the Western world. My wife's teaching it, right? But
Sure.
that's the idea behind it. There's an energy force, a life force that you have inside of you that, I think when you begin to work with it, that's when you really be able to feel it, right? Or to me, that's a gift that God's given us to be able to, hopefully carry out his will or if you want to call God a girl, you can do that too. But
Sure.
you know what I'm saying? Like to be able to like give us those abilities to not only experience the world that we live in, but then, carry out his mission too, right?
So you talked a lot about like the Eastern esoteric thought and, Kundalini and Reiki's Eastern, right? What would be the Western version of that? Like, what would Westerners be practicing that maybe the East is practicing? Or is there any? Is it just more prayer based meditation?
I want to say I found um, the same thing or similar, right, under a different symbol set, under a different, whether you want to call it a myth or a story,
Okay.
right, in the Western world, right? And you can look at those very same things through a Christian lens. You can look at them through a Judaic lens.
You talking about like allegories?
I would say allegory, but even like some of the cosmology, right?
Okay.
Some of the understanding of the planets, maybe perhaps how the world was created, and Hermeticism. That's another. I want to say in the Western world, those are probably like the three things that I really think of when I think of like, that kind of like philosophical and cosmological approach, right? That happened that happens in the Western world, but you also see influences. Even from astrology, you'll see influence in the East, and then you'll see like an Oriental influence in the West as well, too, right? So I don't know. You get bogged down by tradition and lineages and everything else, and I mean, those to me aren't necessarily what's important. It's good to have a good foundation or something to resource, but what does it mean to you, right?
Right. No, that's very well said. If you could tell somebody looking for Freemasonry, looking spiritually, what would you tell them?
I want to kind of preface, 'cause I don't know if we pointed this out. So Freemasonry is not necessarily a spiritual school. It's not a religion, right? It is not something that we engage in to go down a religious rabbit hole. Like for me,
Thank
say
you.
something?
Now I was just going to say thank you for the disclaimer. We
Yeah.
do normally say that
Yeah.
Masonry, but it gives you tools
Yeah.
that work with your spirituality,
Yeah.
with your faith to be a better person, right? They're
Yeah.
working tools, and you learn how to self-improve yourself and help self-improve others.
Yeah.
So you were going to say,
Yeah. So, I want to at least make that clear because
course.
there's a distinction that we made, but it does accent these things well. I'm going to say if you're say your origin is, you're in Judaism, like, I would say like studying the Kabbalah, mystical Judaism, right? I'm saying these things generic so people can look up the terms. I'm not conflating some of the theologies and the cosmological approaches to some of these things. I'm going to say over the past several years from the Christian viewpoint, I really love Martinism. I mean, that is just a beautiful, beautiful tradition. And then on the Hermetic sense, I mean, you can focus on alchemy and astrology and then theurgy, right? So
Theurgy,
yeah,
which is
theurgy is more probably going to be along the lines of like what someone would probably consider like a ceremony or ritual type accent of like whatever it is you could do. Some people might call it magic. Some people just may refer to it as ritual, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say that like in the Western world, those are probably the three like starting points I would say maybe get into. And if that stuff's too heavy, reach out and we start maybe smaller. I try to think about like, we're trying to bring it down, like maybe lower the bar a little bit. But I came in, we talked about that like earlier, right? It's like diving into the deep end, you know, and
Sure.
that's always been me too. Yeah. So I sometimes have a hard time being able to put some of those prompts in front of people.
Of course.
I mean, the Eastern World, the Bhagavad Gita is a fantastic text of poetry and to me it's song, right? Not necessarily, and you're not going to see musical notes, but to me that's what I hear when I read it.
Right.
You know, I mean, it just depends on how far you want to go, right?
Sure.
Like if we're talking, to me, that's more, I want to say maybe the esoteric approaches to some of these things. And then here's one thing that I feel is very hard to do is like find a mentor, find somebody you jive with that's maybe of his approach to this, whether it's intellectual or whether it's a mystical approach to it. Find somebody that is willing to, you know, give you a book or say, hey, listen, like, try this, right? Try this breathing technique or try this meditation, right? If that's what you're looking for, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. As we round out this episode, man, what's one thing you want to tell the world about Masonry?
I mean, really, I think the people that are skeptical about Freemasonry should maybe look into it a little bit more. I mean, I would say even go as far to knock on the door and seek to become a member, because I think they would find something that isn't necessarily something they thought it was. It's probably even better, right? Like, and if nothing else, do your own little investigation into it, or just talk to somebody, right? Talk to a Mason and hopefully get somebody that is able to communicate to you about what the fraternity is. Let them share. You're doing a fantastic thing here, letting other Masons from different backgrounds in their Masonic life share their experiences of what Freemasonry is. So hopefully your listeners are paying attention to that, and they'll get a little taste of everybody, all your guests, right? Different perspectives. So keep uncovering those things. So
that is Worshipful Brother Kevin Fuller, a modern Mason in the modern world. I'm R.L. Franks, and you are all square. Hey, R.L. Franks here. Thanks again for watching today's episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you believe someone can benefit from the message that we provided on today's podcast, send it over to them. You may inspire them.